If you've ever done any reading on the American Civil War, specifically from books published in the last 30 years or so, you've probably come across the name George Templeton Strong at some point. Now, Strong is probably mentioned as being a lawyer, and certainly mentioned as being a diarist, with quotes taken from his diary to discuss things like world events, American politics, public policy, how the war was going, life on the home front during the war. He has become so ingrained in the Civil War narrative that a quick glance over my own books, and I found mentions of him and quotes from his diary in all of these. So, Strong was a diarist, a keen observer of life during the American Civil War. And while he's apparently a very prolific writer, I always just found it easy to associate him with this conflict, and never really thought much more about him. And then I started to read this. The First Tycoon, The Epic Life of Cornelius Vanderbilt, by T.J. Stiles. Wonderful book, seriously, pick it up. And who should pop up again but good old George Templeton Strong. Now, again, that's not really shocking. Vanderbilt's is a New York story. Strong lived and worked in New York City. Vanderbilt was very active during the Civil War era. Strong's diary focuses on the Civil War era. So that, Strong would pop up in a Vanderbilt story is not really a surprising thing. But the first quote that Stiles uses from the diary of George Templeton Strong is dated 1837, a full 24 years before the start of the American Civil War. And at that point, I really started to wonder, who was this guy? Well, that's what we're going to try and find out today. My name is Dan Thurber, this is Bookworm History, and this is the Hang on. This is the diary of George Templeton Strong. George Templeton Strong was born on January 26, 1820, at his family's house at 37 Sugarloaf Street, now Franklin Street, in New York City. When he was 2 years old in 1822, the family moved to a new house, where Strong would spend the majority of his young life, located at 108 Greenwich Street. His father was George Washington Strong, a graduate of Yale, class of 1803, and by the time of his son's birth already one of the most successful and respected lawyers in the state of New York. He was a very well-read man, a prolific letter writer, and very encouraging of his young son's education. Young George Templeton Strong was something of a child prodigy, excelling in both academics as well as music. When he was 9 years old, he took first prize in his school, while the boy who took second prize was, as his father proudly noted, 15 years old. At age 12, he was admitted to the grammar school attached to Columbia College, where he continued to excel, being admitted to the highest class by the end of only his second year. In the fall of 1834, Strong entered Columbia College. As to why he didn't attend Yale like his old man, the reason is really twofold. One, at the time, the elder Strong disagreed with some of the curriculum being taught at Yale. And two, Columbia, while being a smaller school, was significantly closer and more convenient than Yale, which was located in New Haven, Connecticut. Columbia, at the time, was just a hop, skip, and a jump away from the Strong residence at 108 Greenwich Street. Strong graduated from Columbia in 1838. And although he was interested in journalism, music, and teaching, his father encouraged him to pursue the law. As a result, Strong began work that fall in his father's law firm as a clerk. In 1841, he would be admitted to the bar, and in 1844, he became a counselor at law, allowing him to practice in the higher courts. On May 15, 1848, Strong married Ellen Ruggles, a very accomplished amateur singer, and the only daughter of Samuel B. Ruggles. Samuel B. Ruggles was an early New York, let's call him businessman. He was formerly a lawyer, graduate of Yale, class of 1814, and had practiced law for a little while before getting involved in various other things. He was an early promoter of the Erie Canal. He was an early supporter of the Erie Railroad. He founded the Bank of Commerce. Nowadays, he's mostly remembered for donating the land for the construction of Gramercy Park, Gramercy Park is a very lovely bit of green down on the east side that has a very high fence around it as a private park, accessible only to people who own property in the surrounding area. After the wedding, Strong's father gave the happy couple a very lovely house that was located on land given to them by Ruggles. Naturally, it was adjacent to Gramercy Park at 74 East 21st Street. In 1853, Strong was made a trustee of Columbia College, brought in by his father-in-law, Ruggles, who had been a trustee since 1836. Now, Columbia was founded in 1754 by royal charter from King George III under the name of King's College. The Revolution would prove almost disastrous to the school, but it would manage to reopen in 1784 under the name of Columbia, a much more American democratic name. By the 1850s, a vocal minority of the trustees were attempting to make the college, Columbia College, into Columbia University, but to do that, they would need to expand the school, instituting more sciences, opening more departments, and a very conservative leadership was dead set against it. It was to this vocal progressive minority that Strong and Ruggles belonged. With the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861, the Unionist Strong would fall in with the Sanitary Commission, an organization founded in the early days of the war dedicated to treating soldiers' wounds and stemming the spread of disease in army camps. Throughout the duration of the war, Strong would serve as the Commission's treasurer and would help to disperse over $5 million in cash donations, as well as many more millions of donated supplies and equipment. Through his work in the Sanitary Commission, he would come into contact with President Abraham Lincoln, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, as well as General Ulysses S. Grant, among others, and he would become a powerful and influential figure in both New York and Washington, D.C., although he usually chose to remain behind the scenes, working tirelessly in the background. Following the war, he continued his practice as a lawyer, and although he would work several major cases for some powerful clients, his health began to fail him after years of hard work. He passed away in his home at age 55 on July 21st, 1875. Among the mourners at his funeral included such men as John Jacob Astor, New York Governor John A. Dix, and President Ulysses S. Grant. So that's a basic rundown of his life, and if that's all there were to it, he would probably be little remembered today, and certainly much less frequently quoted. And it's perhaps ironic that the source of his fame, his diary, was never intended by him to ever see the light of day. Now, lots of people keep diaries, and lots of people kept diaries during the Civil War, but as I mentioned before, Strong's diary was not limited solely to that conflict, although it is used most often to help study it. You see, what makes Strong's diary different is not just its thoroughness. He wrote almost every day. Not just his keen observations of the world around him, but the fact that he wrote with such thoroughness and with such keen observations for almost 40 years. You see, he started this diary in 1835 at the age of 15 and kept it up until only a month before he passed away in 1875. For almost 40 years he kept his diary, and for him it was a way to reflect, to unload the burdens of the day. It was a source of amusement, and certainly a way to blow off steam. He was very opinionated, as can readily be seen through reading the entries in his diary. You see, what makes this diary different, and such a valuable source for historians, is that despite Strong's obvious care and labor in creating it, he never intended to have it published. So, contrary to other published diaries, it was never combed over by the author or the author's immediate family, anxiously pulling out entries and changing words that might meet with censure or disapproval. He was writing it for himself, and as a result, he never worried that the words he was putting down might meet with disapproval or be misinterpreted or seen as being overly critical. That being said, it is worth noting that a complete unabridged version of the diary does not seem to have ever been published. The edition that I have, which came out in 1952, and we'll talk about that in a second, it seems to be the closest thing to it. Most of the diary of George Templeton Strong's that you can find tend to focus on the Civil War years, and they're even this most complete edition, the editors freely admit that they have removed a few entries that were of interest only to the Strong family, and thus not of interest to the rest of the public at large, and that would be a, as they say, different kind of story. So it's not entirely complete, but apparently the closest thing that we can find to a complete diary outside of the original material. So, if Strong never intended the diary to be published, how did it come to reach the general public? Well, after Strong's death in 1875, the family took his diary, then numbering about 2,250 pages, somewhere between 4 and 4.5 million words, they took this diary and put it away. And they kept it under lock and key for a little over the next 50 years. In 1927, the family loaned the diary to the American Museum of the Red Cross, but even then it didn't really spark the interest of many historians. A few years later, a man named Henry Taft borrowed the diary from the family. You see, Taft was a lawyer, and he worked for the firm that Strong's father had helped to found. Of course, the name had changed by that point, but the firm itself had thus been in existence for over 100 years. Now, Taft's history came out in 1938, and shortly thereafter, Taft mentioned to Dr. Nicholas Murray Butler, who was the president of Columbia University. Columbia would manage to achieve its university status in 1897. Mentioned to Dr. Butler that he was in possession, or at least had knowledge of, a diary containing a wealth of information about early Columbia. Now, through Dr. Butler, the diary came to the attention of the editors at Macmillan, and the editors then went over it and published in 1952 the 4-volume Diary of George Templeton Strong. Slowly and then quite quickly, historians would come to realize exactly what a valuable first-person account the Diary of George Templeton Strong was for anything involving 19th century New York, specifically, of course, the American Civil War. The original diary currently resides within the collection at the New York Historical Society. Well, that's all I've got for you today. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to hit that subscribe button on your way out so you stay up to date on all of our latest episodes. You can always find more interesting and unusual stories over at the website, BookwormHistory.com. As always, if you have any questions or suggestions for other works that I should cover in future videos, feel free to leave them in the comments below. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks for stopping by.